You spoke with love, but they heard pressure. You said it gently, not with demands, not with ultimatums, just honesty, raw, human, hopeful. I miss you. I feel disconnected. I just want to know where I stand. You weren't trying to control them. You weren't asking for more than they could give. You were simply expressing your need for clarity, for closeness, for something real. But somehow, they didn't hear love. They heard pressure, and in an instant, they retreated behind their emotional walls. Their tone changed, their eyes pulled away, and their energy folded back into that distant place you've grown to recognize all too well. It's a place where your words fall into a void, where emotional honesty becomes a threat, where vulnerability is treated like an ambush. And suddenly you're left wondering, did I say too much? Did I push them away? Was I wrong to speak my truth? But deep down, you know better. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't attack. You simply opened your heart, and they weren't ready to meet you there. That's the painful part about loving someone with an avoidant pattern. It's not that they don't care. It's that they can't handle care in real time, especially not when it's honest, especially not when it asks them to feel something. To you, a simple conversation was a bridge. To them, it was a fire alarm. You didn't try to take anything from them. You were offering connection, clarity, presence. But avoidants translate emotional requests through a different language. They hear, "You're not doing enough. You're failing. You're being trapped." Even if all you said was, "I want to understand you." And that disconnect, it's devastating because it makes you question the very nature of communication. It makes you feel like love itself has become unsafe, not just for them, but for you. You start walking on eggshells, holding back your truth, second-guessing your intuition. You convince yourself that timing is something mysterious, something you'll never master. But the truth is, it's not about crafting the perfect sentence. It's not about saying it right. It's about saying it when they're finally ready to hear it. And readiness doesn't come when they're being chased. It comes in silence, in space, in the moment when they realize that what you offered is no longer waiting in the doorway with open arms. You didn't say it wrong. You just said it to someone who wasn't emotionally safe in themselves. And maybe, just maybe, the timing wasn't off because of you. It was off because they were still hiding from a truth. You were brave enough to speak. Why avoidants can't hear you when they feel unsafe? They aren't ignoring you, not in the way it feels. They're defending themselves against something they haven't fully named, something ancient, buried, and deeply misunderstood. To you, closeness means comfort, connection, security, being able to say, "I feel this way," and have someone hold it with gentleness. But to the avoidant, closeness is confrontation, not with you, with themselves. Because when someone gets too close, they're no longer able to maintain the illusion that they're fully in control, emotionally self-sufficient, untouchable. You see, most avoidants aren't cruel. They're guarded. They were once open, but something happened. A caregiver who was inconsistent, a family environment where vulnerability was shamed, a childhood full of expectations but devoid of emotional safety. So they adapted. They learned how to survive by not needing. They found safety in distance, control in silence. And now, as adults, even love feels like a threat. Because to love is to risk needing, and to need is to risk pain. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Avoidants live this. They don't consciously reject you. They reject the internal flood that gets triggered when you offer closeness. You speak with love, but their nervous system hears danger. Your presence touches places in them they've spent a lifetime burying. And here's the key: they can't listen while they're in defense mode. It doesn't matter how kind your tone is, how much grace you give, how many times you try to word it better. If they're emotionally flooded, your words become noise. Even your affection feels like pressure. Even your calm becomes too much, because their mind is scanning for escape, not intimacy. This is where timing enters. To connect with the avoidant, you have to speak when they're receptive, when their inner guard has dropped just enough to let something human through. But here's the paradox: they rarely reach that space while you're chasing it. They need space not to test you, but to regulate themselves, to find the part of them that still wants love, but fears being seen. It's not about walking on eggshells. It's about knowing that love only lands when the heart is still. If they're still fighting ghosts from the past, your voice gets drowned in the war. They don't need perfection. They need stillness. And ironically, it's your silence, not your explaining, that creates the space for them to feel safe enough to listen. Because when you stop speaking to their panic and start holding your truth with peace, you become the one voice they can trust, not because you finally said it right, but because you finally said it at the right time. The silence that speaks louder, emotional timing as power. There's a moment that changes everything. It's not the apology you finally get. It's not the clarity they finally offer. It's not even the "I miss you" that arrives too late. It's the silence, the one you didn't weaponize, the one you didn't fill with over-explaining or hopeful texts, the one that didn't scream, "Please understand me," because it no longer needed to. This silence is different. It's not cold. It's not angry. It's peaceful. And to someone who lives in emotional chaos, peace feels louder than noise. Avoidants are used to pursuit. They're used to lovers who plead, to chaos they can control, to words they can distort and escape from. But what they don't know how to handle is the stillness of someone who no longer needs to be heard. Because now, you're not speaking at them. You're letting your absence speak for you. And in that absence, they begin to hear. Not your voice, but your value. Not your words, but your weight. Not your need, but your energy. See, emotional timing isn't about saying the right thing. It's about knowing when your silence holds more truth than your explanations ever could. It's knowing that sometimes the most powerful communication comes after you stop chasing understanding. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That's what your silence forces them to do. Face what they've been avoiding. Because when your presence disappears, so does their ability to distract themselves from the wound. They can't project onto you anymore. Can't pretend you're the one demanding too much. Can't point to your intensity or your timing as the reason they pulled away. All that's left is the truth. They start to remember the moments you stayed calm while they shut down. The way you softened when they grew cold. The way you gave them space, but never made your love small. And now, your silence echoes louder than any conversation ever did. Because it's not emptiness. It's closure. It's the moment your energy shifts. From reaching out to returning inward. From waiting for them to listen, to listening to your own soul. That's the real power. Not punishing them. Not manipulating them. Just being so rooted in your self-respect that you no longer need to repeat yourself. Because you finally understand. The person who deserves your voice is the one who's emotionally ready to receive it. And if they aren't, your silence will teach them what your words never could. What makes the avoidant finally feel safe enough to listen? They don't return when you beg. They don't come closer when you convince. They don't open up because of what you said. They come back when the panic softens. When the part of them that runs finally slows down. And that shift doesn't happen because you got louder. It happens because you got still. Avoidants don't feel safe with words. They feel safe with energy. They study tone, posture, distance. They subconsciously scan every room for signs of threat. And yes, even love can feel like a threat. Not because they don't want it, but because deep down, they fear what will happen. Once they finally let it in, will it overwhelm me? Will it demand too much? Will I lose myself if I let this person too close? But something changes when you stop proving, when your presence becomes non-reactive, when you radiate acceptance, not of them, but of yourself. That's when their system begins to settle. Not immediately, not all at once, but enough for them to finally feel that maybe they're not being cornered, they're not being evaluated, they're not being pushed, they're being met. And in that energy, they start to hear the things they once distorted. Your "I miss you" no longer sounds like neediness. Your "I want to feel connected" no longer sounds like control. Your boundaries no longer feel like rejection, because now they're not listening with fear. They're listening with curiosity. This is the hidden truth. Avoidants don't fear love, they fear consumption. They're terrified that if they let you in, they'll lose themselves. So when you show them, through time and energy, that you're not here to consume, but to coexist, they finally begin to trust the sound of your voice, because it's no longer filtered through the noise of their past. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But to do that, they must first stop running from the parts of themselves that you tried so patiently to love. And ironically, it's your withdrawal, not your pursuit, that gives them the space to begin that becoming. They listen not because you demanded they do, but because your quiet self-honoring made the noise inside them impossible to ignore. This is the power of timing. They weren't ready before, not because they didn't care, but because their walls were louder than your words. But now, your peace is louder than their panic. And that's what finally makes them open the door, not to win you back, but to finally face what your love was trying to reveal all along. The truth you realized before they do. You were never too much. You thought they'd never hear you. And in a way, they didn't. Not the first time. Not when you whispered your needs into their silence. Not when you offered your soul in moments they weren't ready to meet you. You spoke with sincerity, but they were still living in survival. So you took it personally. You thought your love was overwhelming. Your truth was too sharp. Your desire for connection, too intense. You called yourself too much, just to make sense of their distance. But now, with space between you, with your energy no longer orbiting theirs, you're beginning to understand something deeper. They didn't pull away because you were too much. They pulled away because you were the mirror they weren't ready to look into. Because real connection doesn't just bond, it reveals. It reflects the emptiness, the longing, the fear of being seen without armor. And that's what you did. You saw them. Not the version they perform for the world, but the raw, sacred, unguarded self. They've kept locked away. That's what they couldn't face. That's what they couldn't hear. But now that you've stepped back, now that your silence has settled into their bones, they're left with the truth you always knew. You were never too much. You were only too honest for the lies they told themselves. Too steady for someone used to instability. Too real for a person still hiding behind pretense. And here's the part they'll never forget. You didn't scream to be understood. You left with your dignity intact. And in that departure, you did what words never could. You made them listen, not to the version of you that pleaded, but to the version of themselves that finally sees what your presence was trying to teach all along. Carl Jung once said, The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That's what your love invited them to do. That's why they ran. But now, in your absence, they're beginning to accept the part of themselves that always wanted to stay. The most powerful moment is not when they realize your worth. It's when you do. When you stop wondering if your timing was wrong and start realizing you were always right to speak. You just needed to save your voice. For someone who was finally ready to listen, if you've ever questioned your timing, if you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or too much, this is your reminder. Your voice is sacred. Your truth is worthy. And the right person won't just hear you, they'll feel you. Share your story in the comments. Your experience may help someone feel less alone. Subscribe for more depth, healing, and emotional truth. Carl Jung, inspired and soul-aligned. And remember, you are not here to prove your worth. You are here to embody it.